Hello and welcome to the M.B.Om podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. M.B.Om is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at M.B.Om, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hey friends, I just wanted to pop in and talk a little bit about M.B.Om behind the scenes. When I entered the yoga world as a teacher, I was surprised by how many yoga teachers were struggling with the business side of yoga. And that's why I created M.B.Om. M.B.Om helps yoga teachers and studio owners become entrepreneurs. It helps you to go from surviving to thriving with your yoga business. I am on a mission to change the yoga industry, to teach yoga teachers and studio owners about the business of yoga, and to help you feel more confident, successful, and abundant. After releasing hundreds of podcast episodes, I want to create content that dives deeper into helping yoga entrepreneurs thrive and elevate their businesses. This is where M.B.Om Behind the Scenes comes in. Each week, you will get bonus content from the weekly guest or myself, diving deeper into how you can take the teachings and apply them to your business. This podcast is designed for yoga teachers and studio owners who are ready to take it to the next level. If you enjoy M.B.Om and have been looking for an affordable way to learn more, this is it. For the cost of 2 lattes per month, you will get never-before-heard content that you can't access anywhere else that will give you tangible ways to dive deeper into your yoga business. If this sounds like something you're interested in, let's dive in. Head on over to patreon.com/MBM yoga and sign up to get behind the scenes now. Once again, that's patreon.com/MBOM yoga to get all the exclusive behind the scenes content. I'll see you there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the M.B.Om podcast. I am very excited for this episode of the show. This episode is brought to you in part by OfferingTree, an all-in-one, easy-to-use online business platform that I've been working with for years and that you've probably been hearing about for so long at this point. And if you've been looking to save time, energy, and money, make sure you check out OfferingTree. And of course, don't forget to grab your discount at offeringtree.com/MBM. I've been working on something pretty cool with OfferingTree over the last couple of months, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about that as we head into the episode. But until then, let's dive in. This week on the podcast, I am thrilled to be joined by Jivana Heyman. He is a registered yoga teacher as well as a yoga therapist. He's also the founder and director of the Accessible Yoga Association, which is a nonprofit dedicated to increasing access to the yoga teachings. Accessible Yoga offers conferences, community forums, a podcast, as well as a popular ambassador program. Jivana is also the co-founder of the Accessible Yoga Training School and the author of Accessible Yoga Poses and Practices for Every Body, as well as his upcoming book, which will be released in November 2021, so just a couple of weeks here, called Yoga Revolution: Building a Practice of Courage and Compassion. And in this episode of the podcast, we're diving into Jivana's yoga story, how he got involved with yoga, what inspired him to become a yoga teacher, and really what drew him to teaching accessible yoga. And so he talks about his kind of story with that, and then what's ultimately led him to create his business. We discuss a little bit about what it means to run an accessible yoga class, what accessible yoga is, as well as so much more. And then we also, of course, dive into his upcoming book, which will be out in November. So there's lots of goodness in this episode. I hope that you really enjoy it. And without further ado, here's Jivana. Jivana, welcome to the show today. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Amanda.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive in with you. And I'm curious if you can tell me where you're joining me from today.
I live in Santa Barbara, California.
Amazing. Well, I'm stoked to dive in. We've got so much good stuff to talk about. I was curious if we can start with your, background with yoga, your yoga story, and how you came to become a yoga teacher.
Well, I think it's interesting. It's a long story. I'm sure everyone has a long story, but I actually learned yoga when I was a little child. My little kid, my grandmother taught me, which I always think is interesting because she was kind of like an older hippie and she was practicing every day. And I was always just amazed by her. So that was kind of cool. But then I came back to yoga after college. I was an AIDS activist in the late 80s and early 90s. And I I don't know if you're probably younger than me, but in those days, like AIDS was just overwhelming. And I came out as a gay man and it was just my community was being devastated by the disease. And I was kind of using yoga personally just to keep, I don't know, deal with my own stress and the grief I was feeling with the illness and death that was happening around me. Um, and then it was about, I think it was early 90s. I thought, it'd be great to share the yoga that I was enjoying with my community. And so it occurred to me that I could become a yoga teacher. And actually, my best friend Kurt died in 1995, which is when I finished the teacher training program. He had been really encouraging me to do it, and um, it was just kind of sad, and I don't know what the word is, but like the timing was so interesting that he died just like right around the time that I finished the training, and that really like cemented my, focus of sharing yoga with people with HIV and AIDS, which is what I did for so long, and that's really where that's where accessible yoga started, was in those classes that I was leading for people with HIV and AIDS in San Francisco back then.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing to hear. And I'm curious, like, what was the yoga scene like in like the mid 90s, and especially in terms of creating spaces for like the gay community and people who were dealing with HIV and AIDS?
Yeah, it's a good question actually, because it was really different back then. Like that, the whole yoga studio scene was just really getting started, and there were more traditional yoga centers. Like I was involved with Integral Yoga San Francisco, which had been around for already like a really long time, and it was, you could see these other yoga studios popping up all of a sudden, that were really focused on more physically advanced asana and kind of the physical side of yoga. And luckily I wasn't working through studios. Like I was working through the Integral Yoga Institute, and I was already looking for spaces in the community. Like I was looking, because actually it was interesting that institute wasn't wheelchair accessible. And so I like once I started teaching, I already really wanted to be out in the world and find places that were physically accessible. So, and especially, where my community would access the program. So I started teaching at a hospital in the Castro in San Francisco, and they had a community center, not a community center, like what is it? A conference room. They had a conference room that they let me use. And luckily it was also the beginning of like, I don't know, kind of the wellness stuff. Like they were looking for alternative treatments for anyone. And so the hospital had a great program where they paid me to come in and teach, and the students could take the classes for free. And I taught through that program for almost 15 years. And it was just amazing. Is that what you meant? Is that the question you're asking?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That completely answers it. And I think it's just, interesting to kind of like paint a picture in terms of, how things were and looking at, how things have changed over the last, I guess it'd be like 25 years. And I'm
Yeah.
curious if you can kind of take me through, like, I know you said this is where accessible yoga was kind of born. Can you kind of take me through your career of like your teaching classes and particularly to this group of people?
Mhm.
Like, how did your career kind of evolve?
Yeah, I I was focusing on yoga for people with HIV and AIDS for so long, um, and then I also got involved in running teacher training programs for integral yoga. And I love teacher training. I just found it to be a place where you could really go deep into the teachings. I found that most drop-in classes, I mean, as a teacher and as a student, they seemed limited to me. There wasn't so much time spent on mostly on philosophy, which is something I'm really, really interested in. So I love to take teacher trainings and I love to teach them. And so I basically got hired from Integral Yoga to start leading their 200-hour programs. And And so those were kind of the two things I was doing. I was leading classes in the community, mostly HIV and AIDS, and then other people with disabilities started to come. So it was kind of like yoga for people with disabilities. I started teaching for people with heart disease through the Dean Ornish program, which was an amazing education. I started working for the MS Society in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I taught all over for them. And then I was teaching the 200-hour teacher trainings. And actually, it was quite interesting because what I found is that the people coming to the 200-hour teacher trainings were, in a way, less experienced than many of my students with disabilities that I was teaching in the community. And it felt like there was a real disconnect there, that it was like mostly young, non-disabled people were coming to become yoga teachers. They would, take a teacher training after doing yoga for like a month. And it just seemed weird. And then I had these students who I've been working with for years who were just amazingly dedicated to yoga. And they didn't perceive themselves as potential yoga teachers. You know what I mean? Like they had the idea that they couldn't teach this just because of the image of the yoga teacher was already out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And it's so interesting to think that this was something that was really taking shape, so long ago, because I feel like this is a conversation that's we're
Yeah.
still having in the yoga world, is like, how can we portray yoga as not just for, a certain group of people, which is often, able-bodied folks? How
Yeah.
can we, make our spaces accessible for people with all different types of bodies and having all different types of experiences? So it's interesting to hear that was, kind of a thing that was happening 20, 25 years ago that we're still
Yeah.
working towards in this industry.
I know. It's really frustrating. And actually that's how Accessible Yoga really started, the organization, because I think it was, I don't know what year it was, 2006, maybe 2005, that I realized, well, what had happened is I had like basically convinced some of my students with disabilities to take the 200-hour trainings that I was leading. And some of them did it, and finished and graduated, but some really struggled because of the schedule and the space wasn't accessible physically. And anyway, so I decided, I think it was around 2007, to start an accessible yoga training. And that's when I started using that phrase, accessible yoga. And what I was trying to do was to make the teacher training itself accessible. So like similar to the way that I was trying to adapt my yoga classes, I decided that the trainings, the 200-hour trainings I was teaching, could also be adapted to be accessible to anyone who's interested in taking them. And it was great. I mean, it was about an 8-month-long program I would lead, and we had individual support for each student. They had mentors, and we'd work on making the materials accessible to them in different formats and different testing formats. Like we really worked on different learning styles, all different ways to make the content of the 200-hour training accessible. And so that's what accessible yoga originally was for. And then I also, around the same time, I started leading a program to train yoga teachers to share yoga with people with disabilities, which is more what I'm doing now. Like the accessible yoga training now is really about that. It's about giving teachers tools to make their classes accessible. But thanks for letting me explain all that. I usually don't get time to go back that far.
No, yeah, of course. I really like hearing kind of the background of how people got to where they are now. I think it's just kind of like this really important foundational piece, and just really interesting as well. And I think it's just amazing to kind of hear all of that. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious, for people who maybe aren't familiar with the Accessible Yoga Association, can you share a little bit about, I know you've talked a little bit about it already, but just very much like what that's about and what you do with your business?
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to give one more little backstory that explains it. Is that so? Then I moved out of the Bay Area. Now it's about almost 8 or 9 years ago, down here to Southern California, and that was really hard because I left my community. And when I moved here, I realized, it occurred to me that most yoga teachers are isolated and struggling to share yoga on their own. And especially those of us that work outside of the more commercial mainstream yoga industry, we don't have support. And so, because of that personal struggle I was going through, I decided to it's kind of a long story, but basically, I had one friend here in town named Sherry Clampett, who's an amazing yoga therapist, and she was sharing yoga with people with cancer here. And I noticed I was getting jealous of her. Like I was brand new teacher, I was brand new to town, and I didn't have any work. And I was like jealous of her, and I thought, wow, that's so weird that I'm jealous of someone doing such amazing work. You know what I mean? It just seemed like the wrong response. And so I really sat with that and analyzed like what was I feeling and how could I use yoga to like turn this around? And so I thought about, I don't know if you know the teaching Pratipakshabhavana, which is from the Yoga Sutras. It's about like changing your thinking, like changing from negative thoughts to positive thoughts. Do you know about that?
Okay. I feel like it's familiar to me, but I'm not an expert in the Yoga Sutras. I still have a
Yeah,
lot of learning to do with them.
that's okay. Anyway, so I tried to apply that, and it's basically trying to like analyzing your thoughts and realizing when you're stuck on something that you can approach it from another way. Um, because it's also about looking at how negative thinking can lead to pain, like how, you know what I mean? Like how we go down that into that rabbit hole or whatever it is, like we go down like a bad place. And that when you see it happening, you can stop it by coming up with more like a neutral thought or a positive thought to shift that direction. And so, anyway, I thought rather than feeling jealous of her, I could actually support her, you know, because I love her and I loved her work. So I thought, what could I do like to support her? So I had this idea of creating a conference where she would be on stage and like she would get the focus and I would like build a platform basically for her and people doing similar work. And that's how we came up with the Accessible Yoga Conference, which is how the nonprofit really launched. Was I think it was 2015, we had our first conference here in Santa Barbara, and that really is how that organization came together. And to this day, we offer conferences. Now they're online right now, but we offer them every year. We have like a big ambassador program, and we offer monthly programs on different themes with networking sessions and educational opportunities. So anyway, the nonprofit really came out of that piece around my challenges and frustration of moving to a new place and not having support, and really wanting to create an organization that could be like a professional organization supporting people who, aren't really working in, like I said, mainstream commercial yoga. Although these days it's all changed. And I feel like we can now, accessible yoga is really there for any yoga teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think it's amazing that you've got, events and that type of thing. I'll make sure there's a link for that in the show notes so people can go, check out what you guys have upcoming, because I feel like this, like I said before, I feel like this is a very important conversation. And I'd love to hear a little bit about, if somebody's listening and they're kind of like not really sure why they should care about accessible yoga or making yoga accessible for their students or in their classes. Can we talk about like why this is important for yoga teachers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's really two parts to our work, and one piece is that, like we mentioned, or I think you mentioned earlier, it's like the yoga world is kind of exclusive. It seems like there's a certain image of what a yoga teacher looks like, and a yoga student as well. That you have to be kind of young and flexible and generally white and non-disabled, often women more than men. So there's like a kind of a limited vision of what yoga is, I think, in the West right now, and that's incorrect. I mean, yoga really is a practice that anyone can benefit from. And so I would say the work of accessible yoga is around changing that understanding of who really deserves access to these teachings and practices, and then looking at what those obstacles are. So on the one hand, like I run a training now, like I said, the accessible yoga training, and it has two parts. One is how to adapt classes, like the skills needed to adapt asana and pranayama and meditation to make them accessible for all bodies. Like that's a very practical tool that I feel like yoga teachers really need. And lots of teachers do have that, but I really think all yoga teachers should be able to serve whoever comes to them. And then the other part of what we cover in the training and also through the nonprofit and the programming we do is to look at what the other obstacles to accessibility are. And that often has to do with issues around, racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, all those aspects of, white supremacy that make anything in the world inaccessible, like because it's maybe too expensive, or there's no studio near you, or the classes don't feel welcoming because no one looks like you in that space. You know what I mean? Like there's many reasons why yoga is not accessible that go beyond just the physical practice. It can be more of a cultural thing too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for explaining that. And I think it is, this a really important conversation to be having, because I feel like as a yoga teacher, it's like so often, if I tell people I teach yoga or I work in the yoga space or industry, or I work with yoga studios, and I'll be like, oh yeah, like yoga seems cool, but like I can't do yoga. And I'm always like, why can't you do yoga? And, there's all these different sort of things that people have said in their heads, from, I'm not flexible to, like I'm a man, for example. And I think there is this misconception around who yoga is for. And when you kind of learn more about yoga, like you go through a training or you learn about the philosophy or, the 8 limbs of yoga, I feel like it's very clear that yoga was never intended for like one group of people and one group of people only. It was very much intended to be an inclusive practice. And it's, how in our modern world do we actually make it so? So I guess I know you mentioned that you cover this in your trainings, and I think everyone should go check those out. But can we talk a little bit about how we actually start to make classes accessible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to echo what you just said. I think it's important to clarify that, you're totally right. Like yoga is by nature an accessible practice. So I think sometimes people misunderstand my work, that I'm trying to change yoga, or something. And actually, what I really feel like I'm trying to do is to get back to what the heart of the teachings are. My understanding from studying yoga philosophy is that it's a spiritual practice, and the essential teaching of yoga is that we all have the same spirit within us, right? We have that essence, Atman or Purusha, the Sanskrit words for that essence within us. And everybody has that. Everything has that within us, and even animals and plants. And it's equal. It's like there's no differentiation on that spiritual level, but our embodied human experience is extremely different. And so yoga is about understanding, in a way, that dichotomy, the fact that we are spiritual beings with this essential spiritual nature that we're trying to discover. And we're also having this like very human experience in our body and our minds. And our bodies and minds are limited, actually, and constantly changing according to the yoga teachings. And so yoga is about trying to shift identity from body, mind to spirit, and that's something anyone can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Hey everyone, we're just taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about OfferingTree. Let's face it, online yoga is here to stay. And if you're already teaching online, you have everything you need to get started with an on-demand video library. A video library can be a real game changer for your yoga or wellness business. Let me just give you a quick example. My mom is a part of a yoga studio where she practices online. She had a super, super busy summer, seeing family and friends and traveling quite a bit. And she was telling me how if it hadn't been for the video on-demand library, she probably would have put a pause on her membership. But because she could practice with the videos anytime, anywhere, she decided to keep her membership. I know that building out a brand new offering isn't always as easy as it sounds. And video can be really, really intimidating. That's why I'm super excited to tell you about a new course from OfferingTree that will teach you how to use on-demand video to scale your business. This course is less than an hour and it's completely free. Head on over to offeringtree.com/course to get started. In a little over an hour, you'll learn how to plan, launch, and maintain an on-demand video library that actually makes a difference for your business. The course helps you think through a strategy and pick which video model works best for you and your business. Then you'll learn what you need to record, edit, and upload your videos, plus pointers about pricing and marketing. OfferingTree is a software company that makes it easy for yoga teachers and other wellness entrepreneurs to sell classes, courses, and videos all in one place. This course is an amazing resource and it's free. So what are you waiting for? Go to offeringtree.com/course to get started. All right, now back to the episode.
I think COVID, in a way, may have helped because I think by moving everyone online for a while, it kind of made a little bit more of a level playing field. And I think a lot of people that didn't have a platform got that platform, and especially marginalized teachers, like teachers with marginalized identities. I think the answer, I think, is that if we start to listen to marginalized teachers, including people of color, people with disabilities, trans teachers, like if we allow those teachers to be platformed and their images are shared on social media and yoga media in general, I think that shifts the understanding of what yoga is. We need to change that image. And I think it's happened a lot. I've seen a big shift. Haven't you?
Yeah, I think I've definitely seen and noticed a shift. And I think people are just becoming more aware of it. I think just more aware of how can my language make people feel? How can my language, impact the people that are in my classes? What are little things that I can do to signal that, people are welcome here and, can come into this yoga studio or into this yoga class. So I'm definitely seeing, a lot of this. And I think people are just becoming mindful of it, which is important. Like once you're kind of paying attention to your actions, your words, like the way you're showing up, I think that makes a huge, huge difference.
Yeah. And I love what you said around your words, because I think that's what I really focus on in the accessible yoga training is, the language we use when we're teaching, how, beyond trauma informed, which is a huge piece, like we have to be trauma informed, but also sensitive to culture and, not use gendered language, not use competitive language where we're, having to push people, because I think that creates environments that are inaccessible when we look at yoga in a competitive way. Finding language that helps to share power with the students. So I think one of the main shifts that I ask teachers to make is to look at that how they can create a more collaborative relationship with their students, to create an environment that feels welcoming and that, that can let go a bit of the hierarchy that you see in most teacher-student relationships. You know what I mean? I think that very creates an inaccessible environment. And so if the teacher can share power with the student, that means you ask the student to go on this inner journey and to really become sensitive happening in their inner world, like interoception, right? To really focus on that sensitivity to their inner environment, which is, to me, what an advanced yoga practice is about. So shifting away from the competitive focus on physically advanced asana to more of a, heightened sensitivity to our inner journey. Like if that's the focus of the class, I feel like that's a lot more accessible to people and can start letting go of this idea that, oh, I'm not flexible enough to do yoga, or thin enough or whatever. I'm not a woman. Like those things are just not true, right? Anyone can do yoga.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And I think it is, I really love what you said about taking away that hierarchy. And one of the things I like to teach when I work with teachers is this idea that, we're creating or cultivating a community and you're kind of holding space for this community in a way, but you're not a leader per se. And I say leader in terms of a tribe leader or a political leader or something like that. You're not in control of that. You're just merely there to hold the space for the community and kind of allow this microcosm to flourish, really, to allow people to get to know each other and create like-minded relationships. And I feel like this was one of the interesting things that I saw with the pandemic, and especially with working with studios, is I really recognize studios can really be this kind of thriving heart of a community
Hmm.
where, people come in early to like see their friends in yoga classes and they stay late to talk with them. And in the studio that I work with in Western Canada, there's a group of ladies that come to the morning classes. They're all retired, super cute little women. And then they go for coffee after. And,
Hmm.
that's like a really beautiful aspect of how yoga can serve this like deeper purpose that's not just, I guess, like standing on your hands or your head or,
Right.
and that stuff's great too if you want to do that. But I think thinking about like how yoga can be about more than just the physical practice.
Oh yeah, I love that. I mean, community is essential. I think I think that that's the paradox of yoga is that it's an interpersonal journey, right? Connecting with our spirit, but we actually can do that better in community. We do that through connecting with other people and through caring for other people, through building community. That's actually how we can connect with ourselves. It's a paradox, hard to explain. That's actually the key teaching of my book, that my new book, actually, Yoga Revolution, is about that idea. Like, how is it that yoga is connected with social justice and compassion for other people? You know?
Yeah, amazing. Maybe now is a good time to segue into that. Can you tell me a bit more about the book and then maybe we can dive into a little bit of, some of those main teachings and talk about how those things are connected?
Yeah, and I love what you said. I mean, about that group of students that meets for coffee. I think I don't know. It just feels so important to me. Like that has been my experience over the years. That when I was teaching classes, like I think half of the benefit of going to yoga was seeing your yoga friends, and like so many of my students would come mostly, I think, to see each other. And I remember they would, sometimes call each other if they didn't come to class. It's like I couldn't call someone and be like, "Why aren't you here today?" As a teacher, but they would call each other and be like, why didn't you come today? And this is often people with disabilities who, were having a lot of challenges in life, and coming to class was a big deal. Like maybe that was the only outing they got to take all week. Um, and that just became really important time. So I think building that community is so important. And like I said, that's kind of what led me to that book, I would say, in a way, is just looking at the things that I saw as being really important in my teaching and my practice that don't seem to be emphasized in most yoga culture or most conversation around yoga, which are like that point around connecting with other people. And also this idea of yoga as I wouldn't say as social justice, but as like how social justice is a practice of yoga, that yoga is about service, about caring for other people and compassion, that it's about getting out of our ego mind so that we can connect through our heart with other people. That to me, that's the goal, right? It's not to make your egos bigger and stronger. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that that's really great. And I completely agree with that. And it was making me think about how I feel like it's always interesting to me and seeing this journey as like, a practitioner, a teacher, a human in general, like how we can be on our mat and we can be having this kind of transformational experience, whether it's like physical, emotional, mental, and then we can get off of our mat and we kind of have this choice to make as to like how we interact with the world when we step off the mat. Like, do you take these things that you've just, you know, experienced while you're on your yoga mat into your daily life? And I think for me this was like a really important teaching personally of noticing like, okay, finish a yoga class, feel really great, and then I'm like, hopping on my phone or going to the post office and feeling frustrated because there's a big line and thinking about like, am I really even learning anything? Like, am I taking these learnings to the next step? And I feel like when I finally connected with like, the yoga doesn't just live on the four corners of my mat in, the four walls of a studio or in my home or whatever it is, wherever it is that I'm practicing. I feel like that's when I really kind of started to understand like, okay, this is what it's about. It's about these like the way that I show up every single minute of every single day. And not expecting perfection with that, because we're not going to be perfect as humans, but knowing in those moments where you get frustrated or something triggers you, that you can come back to those practices. Like you can kind of take yourself to your mat and take a deep breath without having to necessarily do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. That's exactly it. And I especially like what you just said about not being perfect. I think it's the opposite. I think what it is to me is that if I practice yoga through my life and not, my mat practice gives me strength and experience that I can then translate into the world. And so what I find in the world is like when I am challenged, if there's a long line at the post office, like you said, or if I mess up, and I like failure is an important theme in my book. I talk about it a lot, like failure as a practice. When I see myself mess up, what is my reaction? And what have I learned about myself through asana in particular, around failure? And I say in the book, like to me, every time I practice asana, there's some failure there. Like I mess up, right? Like there's some point where I'm done with a pose, or I can't hold it longer, or I'm feeling this is not happening today, or whatever. And then what I get to do on the mat is watch my mind react to that, right? Like, do I spiral? Do I get into self-criticism? Do I start holding my breath and get tense? Do I actually have love for myself and realize it's okay? Like I'm doing my best. I'm growing a little bit every day. And so then how does that translate to the failures in my life? When I say something wrong or upset somebody, it's like, can I acknowledge it and like apologize and keep moving forward? Or do I get like I said, spiral out of control and like say terrible things to myself? Do you know what I mean? Like to me, those are the lessons of yoga, that like inner reactions that we have to the challenges in life. And I guess I don't see that translation happening a lot in my students. And that's the whole point of yoga to me, is that understanding our relationship with ourself, like the way we talk to ourselves in our mind, is essential, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was beautifully worded. So thank you for that. And I completely agree. And I think it's so interesting because I think and this again comes back to the perception of yoga, right? Like, I feel like the perception is like, it's a form of exercise, it's a form of stretching, it's a form of strengthening. And sure, it can be all of those things with the physical practice. And that's, why I started going to yoga. I had no idea that there was anything deeper to yoga when I started practicing. And I feel like it's kind of interesting because it takes some time to sort of understand that there's something more to it. And I think when I was still a very, very new practitioner, I sort of was getting these glimpses of it. Like I knew there was something that was like kind of magical about yoga, but I didn't know exactly what it was. And it took a long time for me to kind of really grasp these deeper teachings. And this is what's interesting to me when somebody's like, oh, I'm not flexible enough, I can't come to yoga. And I'm like, like the point isn't to be flexible. Like that's not the point at all, and it's not their fault, right? It's like more on us as people in this space and industry. Like, how can we teach our students that that's like really not what it's about at all?
Right. I've said before, like yoga is not about having a flexible body, it's about having a flexible mind.
Yes, I love that.
Like,
so much more accurate.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the teachings, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and the Bhagavad Gita, which are still the main sources of teachings for what yoga is, there is very little talk about the body. It's really about a relationship with the body and mind and spirit. That's what these teachings are all about. And yet it's hard to have conversations around spirituality that feel accessible and welcoming to people. But I think that's our job, as teachers, is to learn how to translate those teachings into something that people can really make useful. And so that's what my new book is about, is trying to offer, like I share a lot of teachings from the Yoga Sutras, a lot from the Bhagavad Gita, but trying to make them practical and useful for people right now. How can they help us bring yoga into our lives in a way that supports us, deepens our practice, and allows us to be of use in the world so that we can, have a better relationship with ourselves and with others, around us, and that we can be useful in the world. Like I said, like offering service, focusing on social justice issues for me is my service in the world. Like I've been an activist really my whole life. you don't have to be an activist to be a yogi, but I would say you do need to be aware of other people and what is your personal privilege, what is your location, and how are you acting and working and serving in the world in light of that, right? Like, what is your responsibility? And I think that's what yoga asks us. It's just like in the Gita, that's what Arjuna is really faced with. Like, what is his responsibility? He's struggling to go fight a war that he doesn't want to fight. What is his responsibility there? And what is his role? And how can he fulfill it in a way that is, honest and sincere? And actually that's what I think we're all trying to do in yoga and in life, right? It's like,
Yeah.
right? I don't know. What am I here for? Why am I here?
No, I know. I mean, that's the big question, right? Like, why are we on this like ball of fire that's spinning in an infinite universe with a sun and a moon that spins around us with four seasons? Like, it's like very strange when you look up at the sky and start contemplating like how we all got here and then how you got here and whatnot. It can be very like overwhelming, I think.
Yeah.
But I mean,
That's
it's important to think about that.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about yoga is like spiritual teachings that are also practical. And I think that the teachings of yoga are practical in two ways. In one way, they have to do with our embodied experience. And so asana, and the beauty of asana is like it gives us a way to experience spirituality with our physical body. So it's very practical and actually accessible in many ways because it's just so physical. And then also the teachings are just very practical in other ways. Like there's so many amazing clues and teachings and little snippets in all the yoga teachings that are really useful for how we deal with ourselves and our lives. And I feel like we don't talk about them enough, That's what I'm trying to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And so one thing I'd love to hear from you, because I think that there's a lot to think about as a yoga teacher, right? Like and especially if you're a newer yoga teacher, it's like you're trying to kind of grasp the language and the cueing and the actual teaching aspect of it. And then you're trying to run a business so you can actually make like a sustainable income. And then there's all these other pieces to consider, like, this accessibility piece and this equity and equality piece. So when it comes to that, I think that it's easy to get kind of caught up in like, I need to be doing it all. And you kind of said it before, where like, this activism piece for you has always been an important part of your business and the work that you do. If somebody's feeling like kind of this desire to do like a bit more, have a bit more service in their business, but they're also like kind of feeling this, like, I need to be doing it all, like helping all the people. What's maybe like one thing that somebody could start with? Like one thing that they could be doing to, I guess, be putting their service out into the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I talk about this in the book a little bit because I don't I'm not trying to tell people to do service or to act in a particular way. What I try to share in the book is kind of the spiritual practice and the kind of inner experience of what service is about, because that's really the key. It's more of like a state of mind than a particular thing. Like everyone's service looks different. So, for example, if you have a disability, like if you have a chronic illness and you have very limited energy and you have to spend your life inside, especially in COVID, you can't go out. Like your service can be taking care of your body. Like that's your service. Like you don't need to be out like serving people, at a shelter or something. It's okay if you need the time and the energy to support yourself. That self-care is your service. But if you have a lot of energy, if you're young and you have, lots of access to resources, then your service may look different. Like then you might be required to do more because you have more. So in a way, I think it's a completely personal thing, depending on your kind of your social location and your personal resources and your state of mind and kind of where you are in your journey to really decide like, what is my service look like? And like I said, it can be self-care or it can be really out there activist service, like marching and demonstrating. I mean, that's beautiful service too. Or it could be caring for your young child. Like I have two children, and the days when they were babies and infants, that was the most intense service I've ever done of taking care of my kids. So I would just say it's totally personal, and there's no right or wrong way. It's really an attitude. And actually, what it is, to be honest, is simply um, love and action. It's like taking the love that you feel in your heart and acting on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I really like how you talked about kind of, these different ways that you can show up with this. Cause I do feel like sometimes, and I think this is really like kind of spurred on, if you're active on social media or if you're like me, you can
Yeah.
get kind of caught up in the black hole of scrolling on Instagram, where it's easy to kind of come away and feel like I'm not doing enough in so many ways. And that can be, from maybe the programs or the classes you're offering in your business to the service and how you're showing up. And I think we go through different sort of like chapters in life. And sometimes, one chapter looks different than the other. Like, having babies, for example, is a chapter where maybe you don't have a lot of extra output for other people, and your service is very much taking care of your children, which is a very beautiful way to serve the world by, raising children that can show up and be present and have a beautiful, presence in the world. And then other people have maybe like the time and resources to be out there, taking a stand for what they believe in. And I think that this is something that's so important for us to remember, because it's very easy. And I think yoga teachers, like, kind of innately, yoga draws in people who are kind and compassionate and empathetic. And I see this where people are like, I want to do it all. I want to help all the people. And it's like, sometimes they just need to take care of themselves. So I do feel like that's just a really important thing, a really important reminder for myself, as well as I think so many who are listening.
Yeah, and I would actually emphasize it again that it always begins with taking care of yourself. I mean, that's always where it starts. And I actually, my book is in three parts, and the last section of the book is about building a yoga practice, because it's like you can go out in the world and serve, but in the end, you have to have a foundation that will support you, or you're just draining yourself. And I've been there. So it's like I have to spend time taking care of myself, no matter what my service in the world looks like. There has to be that piece. And that's what yoga is so incredible at, is like feeding your soul so that you have something to give. And I would also, going back to the business thing, I think service always begins at home. Like it always starts with yourself and the people directly around you, your family or your friends or your actual community. It's like what I see when I talk to yoga teachers who are just starting out, and they think they have to make like a big splash in the world and be like way out there because they see that happening, like you said, on through social media. I actually don't think that's the way to begin. I think the way to begin teaching is to begin with your community, like whoever that is for you, and it could be a local community, or it could be an identity community. Like say you identify as like a trans teacher and like you want to serve other trans people, like that's your community, and like serving that community is going to be the most, I think, successful way to begin, and even to reach a broader audience through yourself. Do you know what I mean? Like especially the ways that you're different, or the areas where you've been challenged. I think those are the areas you can really serve the best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into your book. So it's called Yoga Revolution: Building a Practice of Courage and Compassion. Is this your second book?
Yes. Yeah. My first book is Accessible Yoga, which is really, it's more asana focused. It's about how to, adapt practices for yourself and your students. And then Yoga Revolution is more about philosophy, definitely more conversational. It's about my journey. So I share more. And all the things we're talking about right now, like about service and self-care, that relationship, which I think is really complex. It's about how do we live the yoga teachings right now, and actually how they come down to building us up so that we can offer more in the world, and how that, and what the inner experience is of doing that, if that makes sense.
Amazing. Yeah. And so the book is going to be out November 16th, 2021. And where can people purchase it?
Anywhere you buy books, honestly. I have, you can find it through my website, jivanaheyman.com. I have like a mini book site. In fact, what I'm doing is I have a bunch of practices I'm giving away to anyone who buys the book. So you can just buy the book anywhere, and then you can enter in the code, like this is the book purchase code, and you'll get access to, I don't know, I have a couple classes on there and meditation on there through my website. And yeah, I would love anyone to get it. You can pre-order ahead of November 16th as well, which is really helpful. Pre-orders are really good. But yeah, I would appreciate, I hope people read the book. I'd love to hear what people think about it. Like, I'm trying to start a conversation in a way. I feel like the yoga community, that we've been a little bit stuck in the way that we're talking and teaching. And I feel like we need to go a little deeper and take like another step. I mean, and a lot of people are doing it. I'm not saying I'm starting that, but I'm trying to encourage conversation around that. Like, how do we actually live yoga? That's my question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big question. And I'm glad you're starting this conversation. So I already have a copy of your book, which I'm so grateful for. I've started reading it and it's incredible. So I'm excited for more people to have access to this. And if people want to find you, social media, where else can they go to kind of follow along with what you're up to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm busy. I'm very busy. I'm active on Instagram at Jivana Heyman, and on Facebook, and also through Accessible Yoga. You can find me at Accessible Yoga and at Accessible Yoga Training. So Accessible Yoga Training is where I lead the trainings. They're like 35-hour online trainings focusing on adapting the practice that I mentioned. And that's how you find me. And also Accessible Yoga, also we have a large Facebook community with over 10,000 people. And that's a good place for people to join. It's free. You can join the community and just be part of the conversation. People talking there about, mostly yoga teachers talking about how to adapt practice, how to be sensitive to their students and to learn and grow. It's a really beautiful place, actually.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation today. This has been really incredible. And I'm really excited for your book to come out and for more people to have access to it, and just appreciate you and all the work that you're doing in this space. So thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you. Actually, you asked such amazing questions, and I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of go way back, which is fun for me, and to look at, kind of how it all happened. So thanks so much, Amanda.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure. All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast. Make sure you go check out everything that Jivana is up to, from, accessible yoga to his books, including his upcoming book, Yoga Revolution, which will be out in a couple of weeks. So lots of goodness going on. If you would like to continue this conversation with us, we continued it behind the scenes, talking about the process of actually writing a book. So taking it from idea to actual, publishing a book. And he had a lot of great tips to share. So if you're interested in that, head on over to patreon.com/M.B.Om yoga. Once again, a big thank you to the sponsor for this week's episode of the show, OfferingTree. Make sure you go check them out, offeringtree.com/M.B.Om to get your discount. And of course, get access to the video on demand course, which is completely free. And if you do check that out, let me know what you think. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the show, and I will see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.